It wasn't until I was dying that I learned my husband avoided me because he was deeply in love with my best friend. The two of them loved each other all their lives but could never be together. They remained chaste for one another. My best friend's husband, the professor, spent his whole life like a monk without a wife. Reborn, I took the professor's hand first. I like you. Let's be together. The professor's eyes darkened. Perfect, so am I. We were on the same page, but this time, my husband and my best friend were the ones who weren't happy. Tormented by lung cancer until I lost the last of my strength, I finally closed my eyes. But my soul did not vanish, it simply left my body. I watched my husband, who had just passed 40, and my childhood best friend embrace tightly in the hospital room. They looked like a pair of entwined mandarin ducks confessing their hearts to one another. Howard, don't be too sad. Cindy is already gone. Sophie, I'm so glad you're here with me. From now on, I will take Cindy's place and always stay with you. I'll even give you a child and accompany you. You don't have to replace anyone, the one I've always loved is you. Howard, I love you too. Good, really good. If I weren't a soul right now, I'd honestly want to applaud that shameless pair. I remember when Sophie's husband died of stomach cancer, she wasn't very upset. Instead, my husband Howard had red-rimmed eyes and fussed over her with concern, running around doing everything for her. He even told me that since she was now alone, I should look after her more. I comforted her at the time and she said, actually, in this life, I never loved Victor. You don't know, I'm so jealous of you, having Howard by your side. I was foolish then and didn't pick up on the undertone of her words. I put my arm around her and said, we're all family. If it makes you happy, you can treat him like your husband and boss him around. When I said that, I didn't notice Howard excitedly knocking over his saucer, nor did I see Sophie looking at him with tender eyes. Thinking back now, what I said was so inappropriate. After 20 years of marriage, I had failed to realize that they had been secretly involved with each other all along. A mix of resentment and suffocation swelled into a tremendous force, pulling my soul into an abyss. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in the cafe 20 years earlier. The four of us, my close friends and I, were sitting at a table taking part in a matchmaking social. Across from us, the late Professor Gu had been young, wearing gold-rimmed glasses, his features delicate and handsome, like someone out of a comic. In the last life, Sophie said she didn't like tall men. After the social mixer she took the initiative to ask Victor out, and the two of them quickly got together and married. As for me, I and the leftover rough-hewn Howard, through day after day of walking the streets together, found each other agreeable and eventually became a couple. Looking now, Howard's gaze was clearly glued to petite Sophie the entire time. I decided to strike first, even if we couldn't end up together, saving Victor once would still count as a good deed. Are you Teacher Victor? I kind of like you. How about we go out for a walk? A flash of surprise crossed Sophie's face as she looked at me. Usually I would let her choose first in situations like this. Victor opposite us didn't say a word, expecting rejection. I was surprised when he said, sure. Victor stood up and picked up my backpack for me. Let's go. It wasn't until we were well outside the restaurant that I came to my senses. I looked at him apologetically. I'm sorry about what I said earlier. Don't get the wrong idea, I'm not. Not at all? Victor smiled lightly, pushing his glasses up with his index finger. Miss Cindy, you don't want to go on a date with me? His reason in my head was swept away by his smile. Only the drum-like heartbeat remained. To be honest, Victor's looks didn't fit current aesthetics, too refined and delicate, his frame slim, he looked incapable of hard work at a glance. Yet when he looked at me, I still heard the voice of my own heart stirring. Doesn't Teacher Victor mind that my conditions are poor? Victor chuckled at that. I think Miss Cindy is very nice. In the following days, Sophie didn't come to find me, probably busy falling in love with Howard. I didn't bother asking. Single-mindedly, I started going on dates with Victor. In this era quick love wasn't a thing yet. What passed for dating was just strolling the streets and talking about life and ideals. When I mentioned that I had to drop out to support my younger brother and felt regretful about it, he suddenly cut me off. Retake the college entrance exam, Cindy. What? Retake the exam, diplomas are only going to matter more. Yes. Reborn into a second life, I was so busy avoiding Howard and Sophie that I never thought of this. But I've been a housewife my whole life and know nothing about these things. I felt a little insecure. Can I do it? He took my hand. Trust me, Cindy, you can do it. I had just sat down at home when I heard someone calling at the door. When I opened it, Sophie was standing there. Her face was full of anger. Cindy, why did you compete with me for Victor? Unlike me, whose care for my younger siblings had made me prudish and old-fashioned, Sophie was a lively girl. She yearned for the kind of romantic love you find in Cheongyao novels. So I had always assumed that Sophie and Victor had drifted apart only after they got married. After we married, Howard and I were busy living our own lives and seldom had deep contact with them. Howard was a skilled tradesman with a decent income, but he didn't have the typical macho attitude. He was considerate. When I was pregnant, he would finish work early to come home and cook, rub my feet when I felt unwell, and chat with me about everyday things. This scene had been seen by Sophie when she came over to visit. She said enviously, "Howard really has a sweet tongue." It made me happy inside too, but thinking Victor must be much the same, I said, "Your Victor is an intellectual. When he's affectionate he's probably even more so, right?" She frowned and shook her head. "Don't say it. A total bookworm, he just annoys me to look at. You don't know, on our wedding day his mother put him on a power trip, he didn't say a single word, and that night he expected to touch me? Dream on." I gaped. "So you two never?" "Exactly." Sophie lifted her chin coquettishly. "A woman's body and heart must agree to be truly pleased, otherwise what's the difference with an animal?" At that time I didn't know she had really made Victor live like a monk for the rest of his life. It wasn't until Victor died of stomach cancer that Sophie came to me and poured out her grievances. Thinking about it, she must have disliked Victor a lot, so why does she act now as if I stole the man she loved? I frowned at Sophie. "You like Victor?" She opened her mouth but said nothing. I understood. "Oh, you're upset because I got there first. No matter who he is, as long as he's the one I choose, you think he's good, right?" Her face flushed. You're talking nonsense. What do you take me for? What did you mean by that just now?" She couldn't argue, so she started to pester. "I don't care. Anyway, I like Victor now, and you have to give him to me." I laughed in anger. "I'm not your mother, so why should I let you? I'd sooner give pigs and dogs than hand this traitorous wretch Victor again." My refusal made her stamp her foot in fury. Before she could say more, a cool voice interrupted. "Even if she were willing to give him up, I wouldn't agree." Victor returned and stood under the willow, his eyes cold as ice. He sneered at Sophie. "Who do you think you are? Coming here to be my master? Do you deserve it?" Sophie's face flushed instantly. She looked at Victor wronged, only to find he remained unmoved. Victor came over and shoved a set of books into my hand. "I figured it might be inconvenient for you, so I bought the books for you." His considerate manner, seen by Sophie, only drove her into jealous frenzy. She turned her head and looked at me with a pitiful expression. "Cindy, we've grown up together since we were kids. I treat you like a real sister. Why are you fighting me for Victor? I really want to be with Victor. Please, give him to me, okay?" She cried, tears streaking her cheeks, heartbroken. Victor, however, sneered. "Do you not understand human speech? I told you, even if she gives him up, I still won't like you." The tone was openly contemptuous. I glanced at him instinctively. Strange, at a time like this he shouldn't be familiar with Sophie, right? Lost in thought, Sophie stormed off in a huff. He turned back and looked at me. "Don't you dare give me up to her, you hear me?" I nodded. "Okay." I came home with a book in hand, and before I could put it down I got a slap on the back of my head. "You brat, where did you get the money to buy that book?" my mother demanded angrily. "A friend gave it to me." What friend? I think you're lying to me. Did you steal money from the house? My mother's face went ashen. Are you out of your mind? That was for your brother's health. He finally has 2 days off on the weekend. I wanted to give him a good meal, and you went and spent the money? I don't remember much of the confusion that day. I only recall that the next day, when Victor saw me bruised and battered, he was unusually embarrassed. Sorry, the book you bought was taken back by my mom, he said, his expression immediately souring. Don't worry, I'll definitely pay you back. I'm not worried about the money. He sighed and said nothing more. That night, Victor knocked on my door carrying several bags of fruit. I don't know what he and my mother had discussed, but after he left, my mother beamed and told me to get ready to marry him. Oh my, I didn't expect my daughter to have such good taste, found herself a teacher. Cindy, when you make it big, don't you dare forget to take care of your brother. I didn't say a word, watching her go into the kitchen in high spirits. Anyway, once I get into university I'll be leaving. I married Victor. The day he came bearing fruit, he came to ask for my hand. The wedding was hurried, but not a single proper courtesy was skipped. I sent invitations to Sophie and Howard, but neither of them came. During the tea ceremony, my mother-in-law suddenly told me to kowtow to our ancestors. Remembering the trouble Sophie had mentioned made my heart skip a beat. I obeyed anyway. 3 clumsy knocks came, banging so hard my forehead reddened. That made my mother-in-law laugh. As she rubbed my brow, she slipped a jade bangle onto my wrist. We're poor, there's nothing else. This family heirloom is for you. Huh? This was the show of force Sophie had warned about? I stared at the green bracelet, feeling a tangle of emotions. Victor took my hand. Mom wants you to have it, so take it. After the toasts were done the guests dispersed and the house fell quiet. I sat on the wooden bed, oddly shy after so long. Ridiculous as it sounds, ever since my accidental miscarriage Howard hardly wanted to touch me. After the rare time he did, he would sit propped against the headboard and smoke for a long time. Only after I died did I learn that my miscarriage had also been because Sophie gave me medicine to invigorate the blood. Victor took a shower, changed into his pajamas, and came over with a towel to help me dry my hands. He'd drunk a fair bit. From his thin lips to the corners of his eyes there was a flush, a slightly seductive charm. What? Thinking about something, afraid of me? I shook my head to dispel those complicated thoughts. Maybe it's better not to have children, fewer ties to worry about. I'm more afraid I won't be able to control myself, I replied. Victor smiled. Go shower, the hot water's already been run for you. I blushed and dawdled my way to the bathroom. Halfway through washing, the light suddenly went out. I cried out, and as I stood up, Victor came in holding a candle. He paused, and when he spoke his voice was a little hoarse. My wife is actually quite a surprise. What followed unfolded naturally. His heat entangled me, I was soft as a pool of water. Just as pleasure nearly sent me into fainting, the light suddenly came back on. Victor's inky eyes were fixed firmly on me, as if I were his whole world. In truth, in my previous life Victor and I hadn't met often, I only thought him cool and aloof. Sophie said that after marriage he was always busy with matters at the school and often stayed overnight at the office. From teacher to professor, all his salary went to her. Sophie dressed up in gaudy finery, drinking coffee and shopping every day, while he, until his death, had only 2 sets of work clothes, and they were worn out. Thinking about it made my chest ache. Victor noticed my change and leaned down to kiss me. Cindy, what's wrong? Have I done something wrong? I hugged him tighter. You're wonderful, husband. From now on I will treat you very, very well. He nibbled at my lips, seeming to murmur something. When I tried to listen again, only a soft sigh remained. Sleeping in the next morning felt perfectly justified. I crawled out of bed red-faced and using my hands and feet, only to be hauled back by Victor. What are you doing so early? I'm going to make breakfast. He held me for a while, then got up out of bed. You were too tired last night, sleep a little longer. I'll go do it. Seeing the red marks covering his back, I buried my face and slipped back under the covers. Marrying Victor didn't seem like such a bad thing after all. The honeyed life with Victor almost made me forget about Sophie. Until one day Howard suddenly came to see me. To be honest, across both my lives, I rarely lost my temper with Howard. In his time, he was a decent husband and a responsible father. Aside from not loving me, he had few faults. But when he stood in front of me and told me to give Victor back to Sophie, anger flared up inside me. That kind of hatred was almost uncontrollable. What about me? As if only now realizing what I had said, he opened his mouth, and after a long pause said awkwardly, "I'll marry you." As he spoke, his tone grew firmer. "You get divorced, I'll marry you." I laughed in exasperation. "And then?" "Then of course we'll live a good life together." Howard added, "Don't worry, I won't hold your being twice married against you." If God had X-ray vision, he would see the question marks in my head about to burst through my skull. I looked at him in disbelief. "You think you're better than Victor? Why on earth should I choose you?" He blurted out, "This is what you owe Sophie." "What?" At the mixer, it was clearly teacher Victor that Sophie liked. "You're her good friend, how can you steal someone like that? Sophie cries at home every day, she's even fallen ill. If anything happens to her, you'll be the sinner. I'm now certain, both of these people are seriously ill. One likes to snatch what belongs to others, the other loves self-sacrifice and the drama of feeling sorry for herself." I took a deep breath and barely contained my fury. "Get out right now, or I'll kill you. Howard, you and Sophie are a perfect match, lock each other up for life and stop ruining people's lives, you delusional low-status man." I was the one who chased Howard out, he even took a spill and ate dirt as he ran. I stood in the doorway with my hands on my hips laughing, being a harridan really does feel good. I turned and saw Victor holding a pastry, looking at me. Oh no, did he hear what I just said? I was thoroughly embarrassed, trying to think of a way to cover it up. Unexpectedly, he didn't bring it up the entire dinner. After my shower I knocked on the study door. Victor was sitting in a chair in a daze. When he saw me he waved. I had barely reached him when he pulled me into his arms. He buried his face in my chest. "Wife, I want to confirm something." "What is it?" "We can talk all we want, but could you not use your hands?" He nibbled my earlobe and murmured hoarsely, digging in the little garden. My head had been hazy, wondering how this person could accelerate so fast. In a flash I realized something and snapped my eyes wide open. "Victor!" He clapped a hand over my mouth. "Keep it down, Mom and Dad are asleep." My heart was pounding so fast I felt sick, the languor turned into surprise. I looked at him in disbelief. "You, aren't you also?" He nodded, "Yes, I was reborn." No wonder. No wonder he agreed so quickly when I asked him that day, no wonder he harbored an inexplicable hostility towards Sophie, no wonder he wanted me to take the college entrance exam. I was so excited I nearly cried. This is wonderful, really wonderful. The favored son's dismal fall was like a lump of bitter air stuck in the throat, each drop leaving an irreconcilable ache. Fortunately, God had given Victor a second chance. I curled into his arms and slowly wrapped myself around him. He tightened his embrace, carried me into the bedroom, and we lay down, pressed together without a seam. The curve of his arm felt reassuring, a steadiness that made me feel safe. I closed my eyes and thought for a moment, then decided to ask, "What exactly happened between you and Sophie back then?" Sophie had told me many unflattering things about Victor, aloof, taciturn, reclusive, and possessing a pride that could be unbearable. I had always assumed those were the reasons for their discord, so I was surprised when Victor told me that Sophie had actually tricked him into marriage from the start. At first I thought she liked me too, until the night we got married, she refused to be with me, and cried, saying my mother had humiliated her with a bracelet. I explained to her many times that my mother didn't mean it that way, but she wouldn't listen. Later, I groveled and begged her, every time she would deliberately humiliate me in front of a lot of people. After she was diagnosed with cancer, she told me that she had actually regretted getting together with me not long after we started dating. She just couldn't bear my status as a teacher and didn't want to separate from it. She wasted my whole life like that. Even after I died, she didn't let me go. While my body was still lying in wake, she held on to Howard and sobbed, throwing herself into his arms. They kissed each other. She told Howard she loathed me, that she had been blind to have chosen me. But when I think about it carefully, haven't I been just as stubborn, wasting a lifetime on her? When Victor said these things, he sounded like he was talking about someone else. But I knew he was as aggrieved as I was. I patted his shoulder. "Stop," I said. "I know." Victor kissed my forehead, then suddenly said, "Actually that day. I saw it." "What?" I propped myself up. He lifted my chin and kissed me deeply. "You used a handkerchief to cover the tear in my clothes, I saw it." In his previous life, Victor died of cancer. Unlike other cancer patients, he seemed to have simply fallen asleep. On the other side of the wall, Sophie was complaining to someone, "He's just a selfish bastard, he made me a widow when I was so young. My life has been truly miserable." Seeing the shirt on the man in the coffin was torn in places, I felt a tightness in my chest. Everything about him was fine, except his unlucky marriage. He lived a lonely life. But his wife Sophie is my close friend, so I couldn't say anything. I took out the handkerchief I always carry, folded it and tucked it into the shirt, barely giving him a last scrap of dignity. Thinking of that scene, Victor choked up a little, held me, deepened the kiss, and in that moment of feeling even shed tears. "Cindy, thank goodness for you, this lifetime, let's live our days well." We stayed like that for a while. I teased him, "Your line is way too old-fashioned, still digging that up, how long ago was that?" He looked a little flushed and scratched his head. "The student told me." I began to prepare for the college entrance exam with all my heart, and Victor bought books to study computer science. The coming decades would be an era of rapid internet development. We couldn't miss that opportunity. In breaks from our struggle, I heard the news that Sophie and Howard were getting married. She sent me an invitation through someone, asking me to attend the wedding banquet. Sophie and I had shared nearly half a lifetime. I considered our bond no weaker than that of blood sisters. I never expected we'd be driven to this point because of a man. This time I wanted to see whether, having married Howard as she wished, she could actually live a good life. On the day of the wedding, she wore a red dress, her face betraying little emotion. It was Howard who was overflowing with joy, drinking from the head table to the foot. He staggered as he tried to take Sophie's hand, but she sidestepped and avoided him. I saw the whole thing. I couldn't quite name what I felt. Dinner dragged on past 4 o'clock, and Victor came to pick me up after class. He was wearing the shirt and trousers I had just bought him, and there was a singular handsome air about him. I couldn't help planting 2 quick kisses on him. The moment I climbed onto the bike, my eyes met Sophie's as she looked over. She had seen Victor too. A flash of admiration crossed her eyes. But Victor kept his gaze on me, smiling as he smoothed my trouser leg before saying, "Let's go." A few days later, Sophie knocked on my door. She seemed awkward and apologized to me. "Cindy. I was wrong, please don't ignore me." I didn't say anything, I just let her in to sit for a while. After that day, she seemed to forget our quarrel and started dropping by my place every few days. Sometimes around dinner time she would peer at the door and say, "Victor still hasn't gotten off work?" That must be tough. The Victor she spoke of had been teaching an evening class at school for a week to avoid her. I didn't expose that little scheme of hers. I only smiled and said, "He's been busy at work lately, he'll be home a bit later." Sophie made an "oh" sound, a little crestfallen. I looked at her and said, "Howard should be home soon too, right? Aren't you going back to cook for him?" She curled her lips. "He can fend for himself. Smelly every day, coming home expecting me to wait on him like some lord? In your dreams." I smiled faintly and said nothing. Only after I saw her off did Victor dare to come back. He frowned slightly. "When did you fall out with her?" "I'm at school every day, I miss you so much." Maybe it was that 2 lifetimes of restraint finally built up, but present-day Victor was downright like a cat that liked to sneak around. Not only clingy in private, his sweet words were getting more and more racy. Sometimes I blushed just hearing them. I playfully pushed her, "Wait until after my college entrance exams and your certificate comes through, we'll move as a family to City A. For now we're neighbors, it wouldn't do to make things awkward." Victor kissed me. "Alright, I'll do as my wife says." Victor dodged and skirted around, but in the end Sophie ran into him. It was a rare weekend. Early in the morning Sophie came to knock on the door, and as soon as she entered she saw him sitting on the sofa and hurried over with a flushed face. "Victor. What are you doing?" He glanced at me in the kitchen and instinctively scooted a little farther away. But Sophie didn't mind at all and sat down beside him. "No, you're a teacher, and there are some characters in this book I don't recognize. Could you teach me?" She wore a cross-collared dress, her chest a pale expanse. Victor felt a prick of jealousy. The look he gave her was faintly angry. He scoffed and stood up. "Miss Sophie, please have some decency. My wife is in the kitchen." Watching the decisive retreat, Sophie's eyes went red. She bit her lip in anger, then turned and met my cool gaze. Instinctively she faltered, "Cindy, are you done with your work?" I hummed, "If I weren't done, I wouldn't be able to see this great show." "What are you talking about?" "I don't understand a word." Sophie played dumb to change the subject. "Cindy, why do you have so many books at home? Are they all Victor's?" "No, they're mine. I'm preparing for the college entrance exam." As expected, Sophie's expression shifted slightly. She forced a smile. "Why? You're married, so why work so hard? Is Victor treating you badly?" I shrugged. "No, it's him who wants me to take the exams. He said once I pass, he'll try to find me a job at the school." Sophie immediately hardened. She'd always thought herself better than me. It was instinctive for her to compare everything with me. I couldn't understand it before. My head was full of sentiment. If she wanted to be superior, I'd indulge her. If she wanted flattery, I'd give it to make her happy. I let her have everything. And yet she still managed to lie with my husband as if in front of my corpse. Now that I think about it, how much of Howard's coldness was at her prompting? How pleased must she have been, knowing my husband kept himself pure for her? "Sophie, if you love competing so much, I'll make sure you'll never outdo me in your whole life." She didn't contact me for several days after she left. I was fully absorbed in my studies. When I went back to my parents' home, I happened to hear my mother say that Sophie had argued with her husband. Apparently she was insisting on taking the college entrance exam. Howard was a technician. What did he know about these things? He just thought, if she wants to take the exam, fine, so he bought her the books. But Sophie studied for 2 days, got a splitting headache, picked a fight with Howard, and then turned and struck him on the head, scarring him right across the face. Hearing that, I felt only that the wicked receive their due. I was exceedingly pleased and read with even more concentration. The night before the exam, Sophie suddenly came to find me. She held a pot of chicken soup and said she had come to cheer me on. "Cindy, I specially cooked this for you, made from the old hen my mother-in-law raised for 3 years. It tastes wonderful, try some." I studied the golden broth. "I don't dare drink this." "Why? Are you afraid I put something in it?" Confession without asking. I shrugged. "Yeah, I'm afraid you drugged it." Sophie choked on her words, a flash of resentment crossing her eyes, quickly masked again by a smile. "We've been sisters for over 10 years, and you still doubt me? That really hurts. If you don't believe me, I'll drink it right now to show you." She poured a bowl, gulped down several mouthfuls. Then she poured another and handed it to me. "There, do you believe me now?" Seeing her trying so hard to win me over, I smirked. "I believe you, but..." I was about to speak when Victor's voice came from behind. "Cindy, Mom's looking for you, come back." "Okay." Not wanting to watch Sophie's face go through every shade of green and purple, I waved goodbye with a smile and turned to follow Victor into the house. The next day Victor deliberately took the day off to accompany me to my exam. When I came out he handed me a thermos and told me, Sophie had diarrhea all night and ended up in the hospital. With that kind of brain, how did she fool me for over 20 years? I gave him an amused look. It's fine, you're not the only victim. The tone made Victor laugh too. He lifted his hand to wipe the moisture from the corner of my mouth. Yeah, we're comrades in misfortune, we've both taken the same spill. Let Howard enjoy this luck from now on. We'll just live our good days. We held hands and strolled home at a leisurely pace. Just as we reached the doorway, we saw a big-headed chicken crouched on the doorstep. Howard? What are you doing? Curling up into a ball at night like that, it's creepy. When Howard saw me, his expression churned. He rushed over as if to hug me, but when he saw my hand in Victor's, he stepped back 2 paces. Why? He stared at me intently. Why did you choose him? I was baffled. Of course, because he's handsome and has a great body. No. No. You should be my wife. He grabbed my hand in a frenzy. Cindy, the one you should marry is me. We even had a child together. Have you forgotten? His palm was cold, and his grip was astonishingly strong. It seemed Howard had been reborn too. Seeing him so agitated, Victor stepped in front of me. Howard, what are you doing barging into someone else's house in the middle of the night? Let go of my wife. Shut up, she's my wife. We've lived together for 20 years, I was the one who buried her, who do you think you are? Trying to take her from me? At those words I couldn't hold back anymore, I raised my hand and slapped Howard hard. You still remember I'm your wife? Nearly grinding my teeth, I enunciated each word. Then how did you forget when you were cozying up to Sophie in front of my corpse? Weren't you in love with her? Weren't you planning to keep yourself pure for her? Weren't you giving me the cold shoulder? Howard, we've been married 20 years, don't you have any sense in your heart whether you treated me well or not? Why did I die? Why did I get lung cancer? Isn't it because you thought about Sophie every day, because you smoked in the bedroom every day, that you caused my illness? I was only 40, you beast. A surge of hatred from my past life hit me, my whole body trembled. That weak, worthless man had bullied me with soft violence all his life, and now he had the nerve to come to me with righteous airs? Howard, I'm asking you, if it hadn't been for Sophie, would I have miscarried? Howard was nearly unable to stand under my scolding. His face held terror, remorse, grief, all of it finally dissolving into helpless sobbing. He collapsed to his knees at my feet with a thud. I'm sorry, wife, it's my fault. Forgive me, please, I can't be without you. The man before me wore dirty work clothes and carried a faint smell of sweat. It seemed the days after marrying Sophie had not been easy for him. Nothing like the time with me, when hot tea and hot meals kept him pampered like a lord. Was he missing me now, or simply lacking a maid? I doubted even Howard himself knew. Victor and I watched him cry with hard faces for a while, exchanged a look, and Victor stepped forward to pry Howard's hands apart. He looked at him coldly. If you truly like Cindy, I can compete with you fairly, provided you're a free man. Your wife is still in the hospital waiting for you. Get out of here and go take care of her. Lingering around here will damage Cindy's reputation. Victor dragged me inside. Once we were out of earshot of others, I leaned in. If Howard gets divorced, would you really be willing to give me up? He pinned me against the wall and kissed me. Lie to him. Don't even think about it, you're mine. When the college entrance exam results came out, I got into a university in City A. After discussing it with Victor and my in-laws, we decided to sell the house and move the whole family to City A. While packing, I overheard Sophie mention divorce to Howard. This time Howard didn't try to stop her, the two of them quickly registered their marriage. In our small town, divorce is a shameful scandal, and every street and alley buzzed with gossip about who had cheated. While I popped out to buy some groceries, Sophie slipped into my house. Because of the move, the door had been left open. She went straight up to the second floor where Victor was tidying his books. He spun around so fast that when he saw Sophie lying naked on the bed he nearly jumped out of his skin. "What are you doing? Are you crazy? Put your clothes on right now." Sophie didn't care at all. She rose and walked closer, step by step. "Husband. I know you came back too. In my past life I was wrong, I shouldn't have ignored you." She had gone out of her way to put on makeup and curl her hair. She felt her figure was better than mine. Striding toward Victor step by step, her eyes were seductive and enticing. She thought, men, sweet-talk them a little, flirt a little, there's nothing you can't get. In her past life she had bewitched Howard so completely he abandoned everyone for her, carrying on under Cindy's nose. Could she not win over this stodgy professor now? But she underestimated Victor's pride and moral sense as a man. He kept a stern face, shot down the stairs, burst into the street and shouted, "Whose old sow has gone missing? She's run into my house." It was dusk, and the workers were returning home, gathering in small clusters to chat at the gate. Hearing that, they all curiously rushed in to see. Sophie didn't even have time to finish dressing and was seen completely naked by the men, women, and children present. I was carrying the groceries back when I happened to hear a scream from inside the house. Amid the uproarious laughter, Sophie rushed out wrapped in a blanket. She shot me a venomous glare as she brushed past. I immediately realized what had happened and instinctively looked for Victor, only to see him leaning against the wall with his hands in his pockets, watching me. The gossiping crowd bustled around us as we regarded each other from a distance. He curled his thin lips slightly and silently mouthed to me, "Come here." I pushed through the crowd and walked to his side. The onlookers dispersing behind us exchanged glances and whispered that Sophie had pale legs and a great figure. I, however, was lost in Victor's tenderness. He took my hand and, as if presenting a prize, planted a quick kiss on me. "Wifey, I've settled our score today." "That fool." I laughed and ruffled his hair. "Unshakable in temptation, our teacher Victor is amazing. Then reward me properly tonight." Gossip seemed to sprout wings. For a while the whole town was laughing at Sophie. The two elders of the Sioux family were ashamed, shut the door and beat her nearly to death. My mother said her father hadn't held back his strength. The stick scratched Sophie's face. "It's feared she won't recover." I got into a university in City A, and Victor was admitted to the same school. I studied literature, he studied computer science. After graduation, he stayed on for a doctorate, and I took a position at a promising leading company. In the first year after graduation, we bought our very first home and brought my parents-in-law to live with us. With a generous budget, the 4-room, 2-living-room apartment was quite comfortable. 2 years later Victor became a faculty member. We saved some money and, while housing prices were still reasonable, bought a small apartment. During that time I became pregnant, but the pregnancy was a bit unstable, so I took an extended leave to rest at home. My parents-in-law were the kind of people shaped by their era, a little older, but still holding decent jobs. They didn't want to disturb me and Victor, so they moved into housing provided by their workplaces. Victor and I lived simple, happy days. To make up for the regrets of my previous life, I always liked buying him lots of clothes. I dressed him up so handsome and elegant, and listened to the students praise him for his suave manners. Victor neither agreed nor argued, he let me fuss, and when I was in a good mood, he would take the opportunity to bargain and tease me. In our last lives, Victor and I both died of cancer, so every year we went for checkups, and each time the results showed we were in good health. I knew the reason I got lung cancer was from inhaling secondhand smoke, but I never understood why Victor had cancer. Not until the doctor told me that the digestive system is an organ of emotion, that sometimes long-term stress can also make the gut fall ill. Victor held me and said maybe he was so happy in this life that his stomach was doing well. But I still imposed a strict diet plan on him. 5 years into our marriage, our relationship had not cooled with time, if anything, it had grown deeper. 7 months pregnant, he accompanied me to a prenatal checkup at the hospital. Just as we stepped into the lobby, we heard a pair of familiar voices arguing. Not far away, Sophie, her belly protruding, pointed at the man across from her and cursed him out. Useless piece of nothing, can't even support your wife and kids, what kind of man are you? The scar on her cheek moved up and down with the motion of her mouth, looking particularly harrowing. The man shouted, "Shut up. If you hadn't insisted I quit my job and come to City A, would I have had an accident and been disabled? Now I don't have a hand and can't find work, and you're the one who looks down on me? I'm telling you, it's all your fault, you jinx." It turned out to be Howard. After all the twists and turns, they were still together. Howard's clothes were in tatters, his face darkened, and his right sleeve hung empty. His expression was feral as he tried to strike Sophie. "It's all your fault. It's all your fault. I was supposed to have a good wife, a steady job. We would buy a house and a car, I would become a chief engineer, respected in the industry. You ruined all of that." After being firmly restrained, that helplessness finally overcame him. Howard clutched his head and sank to his knees, tears filling his eyes, whether from remorse or pain, he couldn't tell. "Why did you turn back to find me? Why?" Even now, he still believed that Sophie alone was to blame for all of it. Sophie's eyes were cold and hard, her tone was icy. "I knew it, you can't let Cindy go. If you like her so much, why don't you go to her? Why in your past life did you insist on being with me? People like you feast your eyes on what's not yours while you still have what you have, serves you right your hand was cut off. This is God's punishment." As soon as she finished, our eyes met. This time she didn't come over to make trouble, she turned and went upstairs. Howard knelt on the floor for a long while, then left in a daze. Victor and I exchanged a look and tacitly pretended nothing had happened. After the checkup, he put his arm around me as we went downstairs. "Wife. I'm so glad I have you. This man." I laughed and squeezed his hand. "Husband, you're great too." I knew that, like me, he felt dizzy after seeing that scene. Two lonely people who had been wronged getting to be reborn in a lifetime, finding lovers and children, how could it not feel like a dream? As if each wanted to steady the other, our hands clasped tightly, the searing warmth interweaving and tangling, our hearts gradually calming. We had just stepped out of the hospital doors when a loud crash rang out. "Oh my God, someone jumped. Quick, quick, call a doctor, this person's bleeding so much. Look, he doesn't have a left hand. Has life been so hard he couldn't go on? Where are his family? Sigh, who knows?" In fact, I caught that familiar brown at the corner of my eye, but Victor and I tacitly didn't turn our heads. When we reached the parking spot, Victor opened the passenger door for me. He fastened my seatbelt, kissed me, then took a blanket from beside him and draped it over my legs. "Let's go, honey, let's go home." "Okay. Let's go baby, time to go home and eat." Behind us, one after another, the white-coated angels rushed out. Whether life remained or death awaited, no one could know. Passing by at the same time was Sophie too, equally with her belly sticking out, jogging along. The car grew more distant. In the end, we were simply not the same kind of people.